You know that cozy feeling you get sitting by a warm fireplace on a cold night? Ever wonder who kept those chimneys clean in the old days so your great-great-grandpa didn't burn his house down? Well, prepare yourself, because the answer isn't some fancy gadget or a magic chimney elf. It was children. Yes, actual children were sent crawling up inside those sooty, pitch-black flues to scrape out gunk. Sounds like a nightmare job, right? For thousands of kids a few centuries ago, it was very real. And trust me, it was about as much fun as it sounds. So how on earth did we end up using little kids as chimney cleaners? First, why did this ridiculous sounding job even exist? To answer that, we have to go back a few hundred years to a time when every decent house had a fireplace, or 5, pumping out heat. Those fireplaces all had chimneys. And chimneys have an issue. Over time, they fill up with soot and tar. If you don't clean them, you risk a chimney fire. Basically, the whole flue can ignite like a giant smokestack, and then your house might burn down. Not ideal. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, people got very serious about preventing fires, including cleaning chimneys regularly. They even passed laws that chimneys had to be cleaned a certain number of times a year to avoid disaster. But here was the catch. After that big fire, new buildings were often designed with narrow, twisted chimneys, some as small as only 9 inches wide, because they thought smaller flues were safer, and also to dodge a hearth tax that charged you per chimney. Yes, people built chimneys like a crazy maze to cheat taxes. The result? These chimneys were too small for an adult to wriggle through, and fancy chimney cleaning tools didn't really exist yet, at least not ones people trusted. So who could fit up those tiny, winding passages to scrape out the soot? Enter the children. In a stroke of pure insanity, someone decided, hey, let's train small kids to climb inside and clean it by hand. And society basically went, sure, why not? Now, you might be wondering, who were these unfortunate little chimney climbers? Spoiler, they weren't the pampered kids of the rich folks enjoying the fireplace. Nope. They were almost always poor children, often orphans, or kids from families so destitute that they were sold off like commodities. Imagine being sold by your own parents to a chimney sweep master for a few coins. That's how a lot of these boys, and even few girls, got into the trade. Some were as young as 5 or 6 years old, a few even younger. Basically, if you were small enough to shimmy up a chimney and unlucky enough not to have anyone to protect you, you got the job. These kids became apprentices to a master sweep, though that makes it sound way nicer than it was. In theory, apprenticeship meant you'd learn a trade and be cared for. In reality, it was more like being an indentured servant, or, let's be honest, practically a slave. Masters would go to orphanages or poorhouses and take kids in, sometimes even striking deals with parish officials to get these children. They'd sign papers, making the master the child's guardian. Once you were in, you belonged to the master until you were an adult, if you lived that long. There was no easy escape. Running away was hard when you're a penniless 8-year-old with nowhere to go, and probably the only clothes you own are covered in soot. So, what was a day in the life of a child chimney sweep like? Let's walk through it. And warning, it's pretty grim. The day would start before sunrise. Your master might kick you awake in some cellar or drafty shed where you slept, likely on a pile of old soot sacks that double as your bed and blanket. Breakfast? Maybe a piece of bread if you're lucky. Then it's off to the first house of the day, carrying the tools of the trade. Perhaps a brush or scraper, maybe just your raw hands and a scraper blade on a long rod. Once at the client's house, you, the smallest kid, are sent to do the dirty work. The fireplace is still reeking of last night's fire. Sometimes it might even still be warm, or have embers. But up the chimney you go. How do you climb a chimney from the inside? You can't really use a ladder, there's barely any space in there. So you would brace your back against one wall, Press your knees and feet against the opposite wall and chimney climb up inch by inch. Remember, these flues could be only 9 inches wide in some spots, not much bigger than a piece of paper. That's why many times kids had to strip down naked or nearly naked to fit. Clothes would snag, so off they went. Up you climb in the pitch dark, feeling for soot and crusty tar deposits to scrape off. You're using your elbows, knees, and feet to push yourself upward. So pretty soon, your skin is getting raw and scraped. You can't see a thing. You're in a cramped tunnel that smells like ash and smoke, and you're probably coughing and choking as you disturb all this soot. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? If you're a fast climber, maybe you reach the top of the chimney after scraping all the way up. Then you get to slide back down to the fireplace, hearth covered head to toe in black soot. And guess what? That soot you just scraped falls down in piles. The master will have you gather it up because it can be sold. Soot was actually sold to farmers as a fertilizer. Yep, nothing wasted. Even chimney crud had a price. Then it's on to the next chimney and the next, all day long. If you slowed down or, heaven forbid, got scared and refused to climb, some masters had a special motivational technique. They'd light a small fire or hot embers under you. No joke, they'd literally light a fire under their apprentice to make him climb faster. If you've ever heard the phrase, light a fire under someone to get them moving, now you know where it came from, and it's horrific. The work was relentless. Chimney sweeps often worked 6 days a week or sometimes all 7 from dawn till dusk. In fact, these kids usually only had 1 day off a year. Yes, 1 day, traditionally May Day, on May 1st. On that day, in some places, the chimney boys would dress up and dance in the streets, celebrating literally the only break in their grinding year. Imagine being ecstatic about having a single day where you don't have to shimmy up a claustrophobic death tube. That was their holiday. By now, you can probably guess that this job was incredibly dangerous. Honestly, it's a miracle any of these kids survived at all. Let's talk hazards. First, there's the immediate risk of suffocation. If a child got wedged in a chimney, which happened a lot, they could literally get stuck in there, trapped in the dark with soot clogging their lungs. Some suffocated to death before anyone could get them out. Often, the only way to retrieve a child's body from a chimney was to break open the wall from the outside. And when coroners examine such cases, they just call it accidental death, as if a kid dying in a chimney was like a random lightning strike and not totally preventable madness. Then there's burns. Sometimes the fireplace wasn't completely out, or the bricks were still searing hot from a recent fire. Imagine climbing inside a chimney that's basically a hot oven. The kids would frequently get scorched or burned. There are stories of careless masters actually keeping the fireplace lit or relighting it to force a child upward, which is just straight up evil. And if the child lost footing in a hot flue, they could fall or get knocked unconscious. Not that there's a soft landing waiting below. Even if you didn't suffocate or burn, the long-term health toll was horrifying. Climbing chimneys day in and day out while your body is still growing tends to mess you up. Many child sweeps developed twisted, deformed spines and kneecaps from contorting themselves in tight spaces. Their ankle joints could warp from all that bracing and climbing. Breathing in soot every day gave them chronic coughs and lung diseases. Think of it like a 6-year-old chain smoker, constantly inhaling smoke and ash. They'd be coughing up black stuff, their growth stunted, and their lungs wrecked before they even hit their teens. And the eyes, soot would rain into their eyes as they worked, causing inflammation and infections. A lot of them had red, inflamed eyes, and some even went partially blind over time. Basically, their bodies were being wrecked from head to toe. And then there was a special cancer with their name on it. In the late 1700s, a London surgeon noticed that a lot of chimney sweeps were getting a nasty form of cancer as teenagers. a cancer of the scrotum, of all things. It came from years of soot embedded in their skin. This chimney sweep's carcinoma was actually the first industrially identified cancer. Imagine that, being so soaked in toxic soot that it literally gives you cancer in your private parts. Absolutely grim. With all these dangers and health horrors, very few chimney sweep kids made it to a healthy adulthood. Many didn't even make it out of childhood. If the job itself didn't kill them quickly by accident, it would slowly destroy their health. Reaching age 20 as a former climbing boy was like beating unbelievable odds. Old age? Almost unheard of for those who started as child sweeps. So after all that, surely these kids earned a decent wage for their pain, right? Ha! Not even close. Most child chimney sweeps weren't paid in any meaningful way. The master sweep would charge the household for the chimney cleaning, but that money went into the master's pocket. The kids might get a few coins of pocket money here or there, or maybe a kind homeowner would tip them a penny out of pity. But generally the children got food, barely enough, rags to wear, and a place to sleep on the floor. That's it. They basically risked their lives every day for the grand reward of not starving to death that day. Talk about a bad deal. As you can imagine, child sweeps were at the very bottom of the social ladder. They weren't respected. Most people either ignored them or viewed them as little more than dirty street urchins, necessary for keeping chimneys clean. These kids would often be seen covered in soot from head to toe, begging or calling out for work with cries of "sweep, sweep," which often sounded like "weep, weep," since some were too young to even pronounce the letter S. Many well-to-do folks just looked the other way, content that their chimneys were clean and their parlors were cozy, not thinking too hard about the child who had just risked his life in their flue. There was a strange tradition in Britain that a chimney sweep at your wedding brings good luck, perhaps because one supposedly saved a king's life once or something. So occasionally a sweep was invited to social events as a token of luck. But make no mistake, that didn't translate into real social acceptance or care for their well-being. For the most part, society shrugged off the suffering of these children for a long time, treating it as just the way things were. So, how did this barbaric practice finally end? Slowly, and only after a lot of kicking and screaming, mostly by the establishment. The funny thing is, technology had started offering solutions early on. In the early 1800s, a few inventors actually came up with mechanical chimney sweeping brushes and tools. In 1803, a guy named George Smart created a sweeping machine, and later an engineer named Joseph Glass improved it with those canes and bristle brushes that chimney sweeps still use today. You'd think everyone would have said, great, now we don't need to send kids into chimneys. But no, many master sweeps flat out refused to adopt the new tools. They argued, with a straight face, that homeowners preferred having a child climb up and scrub the chimney because they believed a human could do a better job than any brush. Unbelievable, right? In 1819, some even testified to Parliament that if they used machines, they'd lose customers. Basically, they didn't want to spend money on equipment when they had a supply of cheap, expendable kids. Why buy a brush when you can exploit a 6-year-old for free? Thankfully, some people did try to fight back. Reformers had been pushing since the late 1700s. Parliament passed laws to curb this, like a 1788 Act that set a minimum age of 8 for apprentices, hardly helpful and rarely enforced. In 1834, they outlawed making any child under 10 an apprentice and forbade children under 14 from climbing chimneys. Then an 1840 law raised the minimum apprenticeship age to 16. Yet without enforcement, masters just ignored these rules. The public's attitude was slow to change. It took more public outrage to push things forward. Charles Kingsley's The Water Babies in 1863, which was basically a scathing critique of child labor through the tale of a chimney sweep boy, made a big splash. People started feeling uncomfortable about the whole child in a chimney situation. The final straw came in 1875 with a tragic incident. That year, an 11-year-old apprentice named George Brewster was sent up a hospital chimney near Cambridge. He got stuck in a flue just 12 inches by 7 inches wide, impossibly small. Despite frantic efforts to free him, they even demolished part of the wall. Poor George died from the ordeal. This wasn't the first time a child had died on the job, but something about this case really shocked the nation. Lord Shaftesbury, a nobleman who had been crusading against child sweeps for decades, seized the moment. He essentially said, "Enough is enough," and pushed through a new law the same year. In September 1875, Parliament passed an act that outright banned the use of kids as chimney sweeps. For real this time. It required sweeps to be licensed and over a certain age, and made it the responsibility of the police to enforce it. At long last, the era of sending little children to clean chimneys came to an end. In Britain, at least. Other countries followed similar paths around that era too. That 1875 law was a huge victory. It didn't just save future climbing boys, it was kind of a tipping point in the broader fight against child labor. Within a few years, Britain made school attendance compulsory for children, which helped keep kids out of coal mines, factories, and yes, chimneys. Society was finally admitting that maybe childhood should involve school and play, not dodging death in a fireplace. In the decades after, the profession of chimney sweep continued, but now it was done by grown men using proper brushes and tools, a much safer gig. And weirdly, once the child cruelty part was gone, chimney sweeps started getting this almost romantic, nostalgic image in pop culture. Think of Mary Poppins in the early 20th century, dancing chimney sweeps on rooftops, singing Chim Chim Cheree. People came to see the sweep as a charming symbol of old London, even a bringer of good luck, rather than remembering the brutal history behind it. Talk about historical whitewashing. So next time you enjoy a cozy fire in a nice fireplace, spare a thought for those tiny chimney climbers of the past. Our ancestors' comfort was built on their misery. It's a dark chapter of history, but it shows how far we've come. We took something horrific, little kids being sacrificed for clean chimneys, and we ended it through awareness, laws, and innovation. The life of a chimney sweep isn't the death sentence it once was. And that's a change worth celebrating, even as we shake our heads at how it ever was allowed to happen. In short, it's a grim reminder of what keeping things cozy used to cost, and why we're lucky to live in a time when no child has to climb up a chimney ever again.